Hey friends, Rich here. Just in case you didn't know, I am an English major, English education to be exact. My dream job is to write scripts for television. I love TV, I love writing, it makes sense. Because of this, I read a lot of scripts and pay a lot of attention to the structure of the shows that I watch. Of any given show, I've probably watched the first handful of episodes more times than all of the other ones. I respect the crap out of pilot episodes and just all first episodes in general. They'll often deviate from the format of the rest of the show in order to grab your attention and set up the story in the most effective way possible. They're really masterclasses in exposition and inciting incidents, because they not only have to have an internal plot structure, but they also have to set the foundations for the character arcs and themes for the entire story going forward. And that's what we'll be talking about today. Because different TV formats will handle their first expository episode differently, I'll be looking at 7 shows in 7 formats, analyzing how they handle exposition and how they get the ball rolling. There won't be any spoilers for the shows I'm discussing beyond S1E1 or S1E2, but if there are any of them you haven't seen that you want to go into completely blind, there is a list of shows as well as the timestamp for when I talk about them in the description. Let's get into it. Freytag's pyramid, also known as the plot pyramid or narrative arc, is the basic storytelling structure that you probably learned about in school. It breaks a story down into 6, technically 5, parts. The exposition, the background of the story, like settings and characters. The inciting incident, the event that sets the plot in motion. The rising action, the meat and potatoes of the story that builds to the climax. The climax, the most dramatic point of the story. The falling action, which ties up loose plot threads, and the resolution or denouement, where the story ends. One-shot pieces of media like movies or short stories can hit all of these beats in their runtime, and novels might spread it out through chapters, but generally the plot as a whole will have decently defined steps of Freytag's pyramid. TV shows and other serialized media end up in a strange spot, especially if they want to tell an overarching storyline similar to that of a novel. The overall story of a show can't be told in just one episode, but each episode needs to tell a compelling story in and of itself. Even purely expository episodes need to have stakes to conquer and a resolution of some sort to cap them off. When you watch the first episode of a show, you're jumping into a world and a life that you aren't familiar with. Exposition is necessary to understand what you're watching. A good first episode acts as a thesis statement of sorts for a series, establishing the overall story elements like our characters and setting, while also acting as the jumping off point for the rest of the plot. Within that episode's runtime, the writer has to decide what exposition is the most crucial to understand the rest of the story and how to deliver it in an engaging way. To get the ball rolling today, we're going to start with Prestige TV, specifically The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is one of my favorite shows ever. It's about Miriam Maisel, aka Midge, who's a young Jewish housewife living in New York in the late 50s, early 60s, who pursues a career in stand-up comedy after her husband leaves her. We follow Midge for the entirety of the first episode, establishing everything we need to know about her and the world she inhabits. She lives on the Upper West Side, in the apartment above the one she grew up in. She and her husband Joel have been married for a couple of years now and have 2 young kids. Midge is very particular about everything and very sure of herself. She knows exactly what life she is supposed to live and does all of the things she is supposed to do to fulfill that. She takes off her makeup when Joel goes to sleep and puts it back on before he wakes up. She measures her proportions every day to make sure she's in perfect shape. When she and Joel visit the Gaslight Cafe, where Joel performs comedy sets from time to time, she knows exactly who to give the brisket to in order to get his time slot moved up, and she keeps a meticulous record of every set Joel ever does. All of this exposition serves to make the moment where this perfect life blows up in Midge's face all the more impactful. Though, unlike most of the things that blow up in Midge's face over the course of the show, this one isn't her fault. Following a disaster of a set from Joel, he reveals that he's been having an affair, packs his things in Midge's suitcase, and leaves her and their kids on the night of Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement. Midge responds by drinking all of their Yom Kippur wine, hopping on the subway to the Gaslight, and delivering a legendary comedic rant about how she ended up there. She gets arrested at the end of it for flashing everyone, and meets Lenny Bruce in jail, who warns her about the hardships and ecstasy of a career in comedy, setting up the ups and downs that Midge herself will face over the next 5 seasons. Maisel is unique out of the shows I'll be talking about today because its first episode was a pilot in the traditional sense of the word. Episode 1 was part of a program from Prime Video that allowed users to vote on which pilot they wanted to see fully realized, and aired nearly 8 months before the rest of the first season. This episode not only had to act as the expository episode for the entire show, but it also had to catch the audience's attention with an engaging plot of its own. To do this, the episode looks at only the essentials. Midge is our main character, and the main plot of the show is her journey of becoming a stand-up. What acts as the climax of this episode, that being her set at the gaslight, acts as an inciting incident for the show as a whole, as does Joel leaving. There's still more of this world to see, like Joel's parents or literally everything about Susie, but those are all storylines that support or complicate Midge's. The conflicts that drive everything in the show are the fact that Joel left and the fact that Midge is going to be a comedian. Everything in the pilot is to that end. If you thought I wasn't going to talk about Good Omens, I fear you underestimate my ability to make everything about Good Omens. Good Omens is a limited series based off of a book with at least 5 different plot threads. As much as I love the book, it is a bit hard to stay invested in the story with how the pacing juggles the individual storylines. I am here for Aziraphale and Crowley, and there are nearly 100 pages in the middle where only a cumulative 2 are about them. One of the main characters doesn't even properly do anything until nearly halfway through the 300-plus page book. These pacing issues can make adapting this story to the screen difficult, but the show handles this by choosing to center Aziraphale and Crowley and putting the other plot threads in a more supporting role. A nearly 30-minute cold open of new material is added to episode 3 to further this gay agenda. However, we are not talking about episode 3, even though it's probably my favorite episode of season 1. The book and the first season of the show follow an angel and a demon who have been on Earth since the beginning, as they are forced to work together to stop Armageddon after the Antichrist goes missing. The first episode, while hopping perspectives, maintains this singular plot thread. We open with Aziraphale and Crowley in the garden, right after the apple. This establishes these two characters' starting points as well as the mythology we're operating within. We then get straight to the meat of things, with Crowley delivering the Antichrist, which shows us, the audience, how he feels about the whole end-of-the-world thing. We shift perspectives during the baby swap sequence, but it still contributes to that main thread. We spend the majority of the rest of the episode following Aziraphale and Crowley as they now exist and decide to work together to raise who they think is the Antichrist. Them realizing that Warlock isn't the real son of Satan acts as the actual inciting incident for the story, the turning point that launches everything else into motion, while the baby swap acts more as the inciting incident for the episode itself. We meet Adam, the actual Antichrist, and his friends immediately after this, and then Armageddon is officially in motion. As I mentioned before, Good Omens has so many subplots. In the book, and in the version of the first episode that's in the script book, every single one of them gets mentioned at least tangentially right at the top. On the other hand, the show waits until episode 2 to introduce all of the plot elements that don't directly relate to the main plot thread. While all of the Witchfinder stuff in the Four Horsemen are important to the story, they aren't immediately relevant right out of the gate. An effort is made in the adaptation to center Aziraphale and Crowley, so their storyline takes priority for an expository episode. They also, despite not actually doing anything if you think about it, act as the main driving forces for the plot. So if you've got to focus on one plot thread, it better be theirs and the main conflict connected to it. Rich, Doctor Who isn't a soap opera. What are you talking about? Yes, it is. A soap opera is defined as a long-running radio or television serial characterized by melodrama, ensemble casts, and sentimentality. If you want to tell me that the longest-running sci-fi series ever, with some of the most ridiculous twists and melodrama, isn't a soap opera, then you can fight me. Genuinely. This is a hill that I am prepared to die on. Doctor Who has, by my count, 3 episodes that you could make a case for being S1E1. One of them I disagree with on a fundamental level, but from a numbering standpoint, it could be the start. I'm going to be looking at 2005's Rose, though. I just know New Who better, and An Unearthly Child is of a time with completely different storytelling conventions and also just really hard to get through on first viewing. If you don't know what Doctor Who is, here's just a really quick overview. This alien has a time travel box and really likes humans, so they invite humans into the time travel box, and then they travel through time. That's essentially it. Series 1 specifically does something really cool that most of New Who doesn't do, where our main character really isn't the Doctor, it's Rose Tyler. Even from just the title, Rose does a fantastic job centering her as our protagonist. Rose is just a normal 19-year-old living in a council flat working a boring job. Like Maisel, we spend much of the exposition of the episode establishing what her normal day looks like. Wake up, go to work, hang out with Mickey, the whole shebang. Once this is established, the writers are able to have it blow up in Rose's face. Literally. Her job literally blows up. That's when she meets the Doctor, this dangerous man of mystery. She gets just a glimpse of his life, of how he can go wherever he wants, and how his life never stays the same from day to day, and she can't help but be mesmerized by it. Rose being invited into the TARDIS acted as a catalyst for the last 20 years of sci-fi television. And Russell T Davies just can't seem to let that go, can he? Soap operas normally have overarching plot lines, and Doctor Who is no exception. But Doctor Who is significantly more episodic than the other shows we've talked about so far. Rose works well as a pilot for this type of show because it gives us just enough exposition about the Doctor and the rules of this world to make what comes later in the series make sense. It also does a good job of setting up Rose's ordinary world so that we actually care about the stakes that affect it. Rose is developed well in the episode, but so is her mom Jackie. We don't get to see the full picture of any of these characters, and with the whole of time and space as our setting, it would be impossible to show all of it. What this episode does, however, is establish the possibilities of those characters and give us just enough context to stick around. Rose is definitely one of the stronger pilot episodes of New Who, and it's the one I definitely recommend someone watch to get into Doctor Who. That spoiler warning at the top of this video was 1,000% for The Good Place. If you've never seen The Good Place, you want to watch it blind. I will only be talking about episode 1 in detail, but please do yourself a favor, pause this video, go watch The Good Place. Good? Great. The Good Place falls into an interesting niche of television because it is a traditional network sitcom in almost every sense of the concept. But it does some insane story work within that format to the point that I'm confused how it got made. I tend to become a fan of shows that can't seem to have full final seasons, so the idea of not even revealing the actual premise until the end of season 1 gives me anxiety sweats. The show follows Eleanor Shellstrop, an Arizona trash bag, who finds herself wrongfully placed in basically heaven as she tries to better herself. Much like Maisel, we spend our entire episode following Eleanor from the moment she wakes up in the Good Place. We get a pretty comprehensive tour of the world we now inhabit, because Eleanor is just as new to it as we are. The afterlife is a point-based system, and the upper echelon get to go to the good place while everyone else goes to the bad place. Michael, the architect, runs the neighborhood, and Janet, the robot assistant, can help residents with whatever they need. Everything is meant to be perfect. Perfect house, perfect people, perfect everything. It's when Eleanor meets her soulmate Chidi that this basic premise is shattered. Eleanor isn't supposed to be here. She's an Arizona trash bag who died from vehicular manslaughter via erectile dysfunction ad on a truck while picking up margarita mix. She didn't do any of the stuff to get into the good place. And Chidi, the formal moral philosophy professor, might have been the worst and best possible person to confide in. This pilot leads directly into episode 2, but it does an insanely good job of establishing all of the moving parts that we need to understand everything that happens later. As we keep seeing time and time again, in order to create conflict, you have to have a status quo to disrupt, a routine to put a wrinkle in. Eleanor's mere existence is this wrinkle that causes both internal and external conflict that drives the story. We get all of the building blocks we need to knock down later within this episode. Steven Universe is one of the standout cartoon series of the 2010s. While I didn't watch it while it was coming out, It's recently become an absolute favorite. It's a show known for its slow burn plot and world building and fantastic character arcs. How in the world is it meant to be summed up in a single 11-minute episode? Gem Glow does the best job I think it could have given the format. We follow our titular character, Steven, as he finds out that his favorite brand of ice cream sandwich has been discontinued. Just that opening scene says so much about Steven as a character. It shows how deeply he feels about everything, something we come back to again and again throughout the show. When he goes back home, we get to see what Steven's routine life consists of. The crystal gems fight monsters regularly enough that Steven is barely fazed, still caring more about cookie cats than the Chekhov's gun in his living room. The status quo here to break is that Steven is excluded. The plot of the episode and the whole show is officially set in motion when Steven's gem glows. We get some very fun exposition of how the gems work and how they all interact with Steven as they try to help him summon his weapon so he can be included. This episode is such a great character snapshot for our main gang. I think it, paired with the immediate following episode, Laser Light Cannon, makes for an exceptional introduction to the entire story. Laser Light Cannon introduces us to Greg and Rose Quartz, while also laying the seeds for all of the space stuff with its Monster of the Week. The Red Eye itself acts as an inciting incident for the series proper, though on a much smaller scale. Through this obstacle, we get to see the expectations that Steven has to live up to and who his mom was at the end of her character arc. These two episodes show us the premise of the show at a glance. There's cool magical stuff all around Steven, ingrained in his daily life, and he doesn't understand it. But he's going to. He is a determined kid with a big heart, and he isn't going to give up. So much lurks beneath the surface of this giant iceberg of a show, but everything going forward hinges on the basic information within these two expository episodes, either expanding on or subverting these status quos later on down the line. I am drawing a distinction between animated shows with an 11-minute runtime and a 22-minute runtime, mostly because of how they handle B-plots in their series as proper. There isn't a single episode of Steven Universe, including the movie and future, that has a B-plot. In order to have a B-plot, we get the Townie episodes, which focus on minor plot threads that don't play much, if any, role in the overall story. Gravity Falls, our example for a 22-minute cartoon, on the other hand, does have B-plots within its episodes. I think that's enough to differentiate it as a different structure of storytelling. Gravity Falls is similar to Steven Universe in that it is a legendary defining series for animation in the 2010s and has an overarching plot that doesn't become obvious until later in the series. Just in case you don't know, this show follows Dipper and Mabel Pines as they spend the summer with their Grunkle Stan in the mysterious town of Gravity Falls, Oregon. The cold open of Tourist Trapped acts as an amazing attention grabber. This is Dipper, this is Mabel, they are twins, there's a monster after them. That's the entire premise of the show. We get a bit more information after the titles, like how they're staying with their Grunkle Stan, and we see how all of the character dynamics are when they start out. Everyone sort of picks on Dipper, Mabel is boy crazy and full of energy, and Grunkle Stan scams everyone he has a chance to. We also, like with all of these other shows, get a glimpse into what the daily lives of these characters are so that we can destroy it with our inciting incident. In Gravity Falls' case, that's Dipper finding the journal. I would make an argument that the inciting incident for this episode specifically, though, is Mabel meeting Norman, because that sets in motion the conflict we're going to see play out over the next 22 minutes. The journal is more a piece of exposition at this point. The button of this episode establishes the mystery surrounding Grunkle Stan. Dipper's closing narration playing over this scene challenges the two core philosophies at play in the show, that there is no one you can trust, and that nothing strange is going on. Tourist Trapped does a good job of highlighting the sort of sibling tension that drives a lot of the conflict. Mabel confidently runs into a situation Dipper disagrees with, they argue about it, and then by the time the Monster of the Week gets flipped on its head, they've decided to work together because they're family and love each other. This vague plot structure can be applied to essentially every A-plot in the first season and the more episodic episodes in Season 2. That's why Tourist Trapped works so well as a pilot. It not only sets up the exposition and plot seeds for the entire series in an engaging way, but it also establishes the format of the show. That way, it can not only break the characters' routines to cause conflict, but it can also play with the audience's expectations of the format to deliver hard-hitting episodes. The last show format I want to talk about is anime. Most anime are adapted from manga, which deliver information in a completely different way to Western television. Like Steven Universe, an anime will usually not have B-plots in any of its episodes, instead having to go on extended narrative side quests for minor storylines because of how manga has to be paced for weekly serialization. My Hero Academia is my personal favorite anime, and it centers around Izuku Midoriya as he goes to superhero high school to become the greatest hero despite the obstacles he faces. The first chapter of the manga is adapted into 2 episodes, which we'll be looking at today. We don't get the info dump of world info until after the titles of episode 1, but we get to see everything about who Izuku is and how he navigates the world around him with essentially a scene and a half. The show opens with our 2 main characters as children. Izuku is crying and scared, but still standing up for what's right, while his childhood friend Katsuki Bakugo is caught up in how power determines someone's worth. Despite the reality of Izuku's situation, he is still passionate and determined to succeed, a mindset that defines the entirety of this character. The episode goes on to, like Gravity Falls, tell us how the world is, but also show us that in action. The fight between the sludge villain Kamui Woods and Mount Lady does a good job of establishing that villain fights in public are a regular enough occurrence, and that doing hero work is both a public service and a way to gain clout. This scene also establishes how much of a nerd Izuku is. I think it also has a great glimpse at how Izuku really is when he's comfortable, especially contrasted with the very next scene where he is not comfortable at all. The scene at the school shows us who Bakugo is now and what motivates him, though this is the only time in the entire series that money is ever mentioned as one of his motivations. It establishes that you have to go to school to be a hero, what UA is, and that Izuku shouldn't want to go there at all. After this, we're introduced to the ideal of All Might, right after some world stuff that's immediately relevant. However, our inciting incident, Izuku meeting All Might, turns him from a symbol into a character with weaknesses. We're also able to break Izuku's resolve here, which makes his actions to save Bakugo even more noteworthy. We've seen repeatedly that Bakugo is horrible to him. We've seen him be told time and time again that he can't do anything. The fact that he does something anyway, for no other reason than him implicitly knowing it was what he should do, is a defining character moment that endears him to both the viewer and All Might. We end our 2-part pilot with All Might offering Izuku One for All, the plot device that everything else relies on. This opening establishes all the foundations we need to understand the story going forward. We see how quirks impact the world and our main characters, as well as the 2 of their starting points and impressions of All Might. It also brings up in our minds a key question that crops up throughout the entire series. What does it mean to be a hero? It shows us the role that perception plays in hero work, as well as the bystander behavior that becomes so critical to the ideals of our main villain, who we don't even meet until near the end of Season 1. None of that matters, though, unless we understand Izuku. These episodes do so much heavy lifting for their stories, giving us as the audience characters and a world to care about, establishing a status quo to be broken, and asking the questions that move the plot forward. The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel sets up who Midge is, shows the turning point for her life, and asks the big question of the story of whether or not pursuing comedy is worth it or even possible. Good Omens uses its opener to set up the main conflict of the story, focusing on the main driving plot forces in order to set the stage for other threads and establishes the themes of nature versus nurture and what it means to be human. Doctor Who establishes both Rose Tyler and this iteration of the Doctor, and gives Rose just enough reason to want to make the choice to push the plot forward, while setting up the basics of this universe to play with in future episodes. The Good Place both establishes the premise and begins to break it down, piece by piece, while also introducing the major themes we'll be playing with through the characters of Chidi and Eleanor. Steven Universe, with its much slower pacing, introduces the tip of the iceberg, including our main characters and the premise of the world, while showing how they interact with one another and the underlying conflicts that drive those interactions. Gravity Falls gives an effective teaser for the rest of the show, while focusing on the driving interpersonal relationships of the series. My Hero Academia uses its first 2 episodes to introduce important themes, characters, and symbols for the story to work through over the next 7 seasons. So what does this mean? Well, as a writer, it's important to make the starting point for your story and characters strong enough to drive the rest of the series. This exposition effectively acts as a thesis statement for the whole show, and can set the tone or give you something to subvert later. It might be fun to write dramatic reveals or intense fights, But none of that matters without the foundations of the exposition. Without these driving forces being fleshed out, a story can fall flat. Endings are important, but they're only as strong as their beginnings. Unless you're Parks and Recreation, then first impressions don't matter at all. That's all I have for this topic for now. I have so many other ideas for screenwriting yap sessions, so if you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on specific topics or series, let me know in the comments. Also, please consider liking and subscribing and checking out my other platforms. The art I made in this video can be found in full and for download over on my Ko-Fi, and I also have commissions open on there and VGen as well if you like what you see. So I guess until next time, I'm Rich Jessa J. You've been a great audience. Thank you and good night.